Welcome to the writer reads Mack and Me, an Odyssey. Book 1, Mack and Me Origins. Chapter 20, Entry Point. The shuttle descended swiftly, dropping like an energized stone and then moving like a spear toward its target. Whoever was flying this thing was as nutso as any of Mack's pilots, and I wondered if flyers working on the dark side of the law needed to be a special kind of crazy, or if those were the only ones people like Mack and Bendigo would hire. I also wondered just how long I was going to survive once this mission was done. From what I'd seen of Bendigo, he'd lied to Mac, and I darned well knew he'd lied to me. Odyssey was still at the site. Bendigo was really Bastian, and I was really important to the mission. Well, maybe that last one was true, if only because I was still alive to prove it, and the stars knew how long that state would last once it was done. I went over the mission one more time, poking at the pieces I didn't have enough information on, like where the servers were that Bendigo needed me to access, what they were, if they were interconnected with the rest of the complex or air gapped, and I wondered what else he hadn't told me, like, for instance, who it was that had owned the complex in the first place. Well, that was one thing I could ask. Whose is it? Bendigo looked at me. What? You mean who? Oh, the complex. Whose is it? He smirked. You mean whose was it? Yeah, that too. We called him Bastian the Ghoul. He was called Bastian as well? He was. He was. Well, at least this Bastian didn't seem pleased with the idea. I couldn't get him to change it. He paused, staring moodily past me out the window. He thought it was funny. And well he might, I thought, if you'd been as much of an arsehole to him as you've been to me. But I didn't say that out loud. I asked something else instead. Who was he? Bendigo raised an eyebrow. You mean, who was he to me? I nodded. He was my partner, my boss until I worked out he was making more of a profit than I was, and then, since I was taking the biggest risk, my partner. Some things don't survive exposure. Again he lapsed into silence, so of course I had to fill it. So, what did he do that was so profitable? Bendigo slid me a sideways look and smiled like he had a secret he intended to keep. I waited, watching while he decided what I needed to know and what he could safely keep to himself. I saw when he decided it didn't matter what he told me, and knew then I was dead at mission's end. Stars help me, I thought, but Bendigo was talking, and I needed all the information I could get. He started out on the regen team at Newbots, and then he wanted to take it another step. He wanted to perpetuate the process, build it into a person's DNA so they never lost the ability to renew their cells. Regeneration doesn't let you do that. There's a limit as to how many times you can grow the things back. I nodded. I knew that, but Bendigo wasn't done setting the scene. Gould got into cloning, and then he worked on knowledge transference. He couldn't manage personality, but implants take the science halfway there if the subject can transfer memory into the chips. The clone can get the experiences, if not all of the emotional impact. In the end, he managed to get the personality match close. He told me he wanted to live forever. I snorted, and Bendigo glared at me. You can laugh all you want, but Gould is further down that path than any other scientist has ever been. The man was a genius to start with, and he's motivated and task fixated. Bendigo paused. Those traits, and the fact he doesn't care who or what he kills in the process, make him a force to be reckoned with. Only thing he can't do is people. He just doesn't get it. Doesn't want to either. Stars help us. I thought Bendigo was a big one to talk, given the lengths he was prepared to go to get what he wanted, which reminded me. So, what do you want with him? And just like that, I had the man's full attention. I wasn't in the complex for the fun of it, he said, and I curled a lip. No, I get it. Profit was at stake. I watched as his expression turned scornful. You're wrong, he said. The profits could be damned. You might remember that you had to shoot me free of that wool. Yeah. Now I thought about it, I did. Not that I would ever admit it. Your point? He knew about Odyssey, called me off the ship before their team could hit it. So far, that didn't sound too bad. And then he kidnapped me. Well, that would do it. Nothing like a good kidnapping to wreck a partnership. Which was okay because it got me out of there. It was when he said I was a liability that I realized what he was going to do. I'd seen what his side projects were and how he made his money. I don't mind financing them, but I wasn't going to be one of them. I managed to get a message out. And Mac answered. The smirk was back. Yes, he did. So how did you fool him? Because I was guessing Mac wasn't easily fooled. It took some work, but I have friends. They delayed Tenz's searches long enough for the rescue to happen. After that, it was only a matter of time. I wanted to ask what he planned to do with me when the mission was over, but I decided not to. I decided it would be better if Bendigo believed I thought he'd let me go. So not going to happen. Rowan's voice in my head was not a comfort. Shut it, I ordered. Then, because I had to give the boy a chance of getting out of this, even if I didn't, here. Sending him the location of the needle ship Mac and I had hidden in Gould's complex. It took no more than an eye blink. Unfortunately, it meant I took my eyes off Bendigo for just a blink too long. So, he said, settling his arm across my shoulders and tucking me against his side, where is the boy? I froze and felt Rowan abruptly leave my head. Well, that was one less thing to worry about. On the other hand, at least I could answer Bendigo's question honestly. I don't know, I said. But he is on this ship, isn't he? Because your implant only has limited range, right? Damn, this man was too smart for anyone's good, especially mine. I might have been quiet for too long because Bendigo's arm tightened. Isn't he, Cutter? I took a breath, about to repeat that I didn't know, which was at least partly true. Thing was, I also knew I was going to be in a world of hurt if I did. Fortunately, the pilot chose that moment to intervene. 1 minute, he said, and I felt the shuttle bank sharply to the left, pressing me hard against the wall. It made me almost glad that Bendigo's arm was around me. This way, his weight was on his elbow, which was resting against the wall rather than on me. Granted, his elbow curved around my left shoulder so that his hand rested on my right, and I was a lot closer than I ever wanted to be to the guy, but still, there was close, then there was close, and as close went, this was preferable to being crushed. He glanced forward, then reached across me with his other hand and switched off the console. His whiskers tickled my ear, and I felt the warmth of his breath as he spoke. Lucky break. And he gave me one final squeeze before unhooking his arm. I thought he was about to get out of his seat and head aft to the cargo hold, but he didn't. Instead, he checked his safety harness, pulling it tight as he leant back on his chair. Brace, he said, and although he kept his voice soft, I heard it for the broadcast command it was. Brace? That thought was as far as I got before the shuttle dropped out of the air. I had just enough time to brace my hands and feet against the wall in front of me before the shuttle landed. I thought it was going to hit hard, but it didn't. It braked hard, and then it settled to the ground as lightly as any passenger could have wished. Bendigo was out of his seat almost as soon as the touchdown vibrated through the floor. He fixed me with a stern stare as he unclipped his harness and got to his feet. Stay. I had been in the process of reaching for my buckles, but I stopped. Stay, huh? But Bendigo was still staring, so I nodded, swallowing hard against the sudden surge of fear in my gut. I also raised my hands as though surrendering, which in a way I was. At this point, if Bendigo wanted me to stay, then I'd stay. It wasn't like I had a lot of choice. I watched as he turned away, apparently satisfied I'd obey. Damn the man, but he read people far too well. My thoughts slipped to Rowan, and I hoped the boy was able to stay out of sight. I also hoped there wasn't enough time for Bendigo to look for him, because that seemed to be the boy's only hope. The last hope was one prayer the universe seemed to say yes to, because Bendigo returned from the rear of the ship carrying a pack. He dumped it in the seat beside me and turned for the door. Put it on and move out. Move out? Well, I was more than ready to obey that call. I wondered if I could get away with moving out and moving as far away from him as I could get. As if he could read my mind, he stopped at the door and glanced over his shoulder. Stay close, Cutter. I won't be pleased if I have to drag you with me. Point taken. I gritted my jaw and nodded. As he turned away, I risked a glance toward the cargo hold and noted the faux casual pose Bendigo's lieutenant had taken beside the door. I stood, picking up the pack and sliding its straps across my shoulders. As I did so, I took a more covert glance the other way, toward the cockpit. Another of Bendigo's men stood in the doorway, blazer held casually in front. Well, that settled that then. The man was taking no chances, and I was still alive, so that meant he really did need me. And I was curious as to what might be in the ghoul's hidden database that Bendigo would risk capture to retrieve before Odyssey discovered it existed. How he even knew Odyssey would discover it was a much easier stretch. Like I've said, Odyssey were thorough. They'd take Ghoul's lair apart until they were sure they'd found everything that needed to be found, and then they'd go over it again and take apart anything they'd missed. I was sure of that, in exactly the same way I was sure they would do the same to me if they caught me when I finally did make a break for freedom. Bendigo gave me no time to contemplate that, however. He waited to make sure I was following, and then headed out the hatch. As soon as his feet hit the ground, he broke into a quick trot. I trotted after him, wishing I'd been able to check my equipment before leaving the ship. We'd landed in a small valley which narrowed at both ends. This way, Bendigo commanded, heading slightly downhill toward one end, and then he added something else which was clearly not directed at me. Get the ship under cover, and stay with it, and keep an eye out for the brat. I shot him a startled look, and his mouth twisted. It wasn't quite a smile, more a grimace, and it was gone too quickly for me to be sure what it meant. But Bendigo kept up a smart dog trot until we reached the valley's end and the cover of a small grove of trees. I followed him into their shelter and then glanced back toward the ship. It was still there, but it was moving toward the base of a cliff that stood at the other end of the valley. There were more trees there. In fact, now I was looking for them, I noticed that trees cloaked the sides of the valley, leaving only a very small area in which the ship could have landed, and then only vertically. That explained the drop then. Move, Cutter! Bendigo's voice brought me back to the present, and I hurried toward him. He was standing in front of an outcrop of rocks. The trees were tangled around and over them, hiding them from the air. They also hid the fact that the rocks protruded straight from the side of the hill. As soon as I started moving toward him, Bendigo ducked into an opening between them and disappeared from sight. I discovered why as soon as I reached where he'd been standing. There was a narrow gap between the rocks, one that led to a door set into the side of the hill. It was perfect camouflage for a second entrance. I wondered just how much Bendigo hadn't told Mack about the mission, because I was pretty sure Mack knew nothing about this. I watched as Bendigo opened the door and stepped into the small chamber beyond, and then I followed him through. From what I could see from inside it, this was some sort of airlock, and just as that thought crossed my mind, the door closed behind us. Looks like you're up, Bendigo said as a second door slid across in front of us, blocking the only other exit. I looked at him, and he jerked a hand toward the keypad he'd been trying at the internal door. It's not responding. I heard the hiss of air and glanced toward the ceiling. Oh, I wouldn't say that, I told him, indicating the faint white wisps coming through some newly opened vents. That's a response. He glanced up and then glanced at the timepiece on his wrist. I'd say you have got around 30 seconds before that hits us, he said, then added, when it does, we're probably dead. Dead? What sort of guy kills intruders before finding out what they want? I asked, moving over to the keypad and shrugging out of the pack as I did so. Bendigo glanced from the vents back to me. I didn't say that would kill us, he said, but I don't think you want to be paralyzed when Bastien gets to meet you, given what he likes to do. I froze, remembering what Bastien the Ghoul had done the last time I'd met him. I started to shake when I'd remembered what he'd done to the others that had been brought to keep me company. I stopped halfway through opening the pack, so unnerved that I didn't even think to ask why he thought Bastien the Ghoul was still alive. Don't stop, girl, Bendigo said, nudging me roughly with his hand. Or do you want to meet Bastien again? I forced my hands to move once more, focusing on what was in the pack until I found what I needed. And then I turned to the door. I had the cover off and had almost worked out the sequence when Bendigo covered my mouth. What the? I wondered, nearly dropping my tools in fright. And then I registered the mask. Well, why hadn't he told me about that in the first place? Don't stop, his voice in my ear. Just breathe. I took a deep breath and willed my hands to move again, hardwiring the implant to the box and working the numbers in my head. I heard the locks open just as the note changed in the hissing over our heads. Bendigo grabbed my pack with one hand and me with the other and dragged me through the door, barely giving me time to unplug before punching the controls on the other side. I caught a glimpse of green descending through the white mist above and didn't argue. It looked like Bastien was a sore loser over everything, and our only hope was if the door closed in time. Bendigo might have stopped to close the door, but I shook free of his grip and trotted past him by a good few feet. You know where you're going? Well, that stopped me in my tracks. I heard the door shut and Bendigo's quick steps as he caught up with me. Come on, girl. And all I could think of was, again with the dog terms. It was a thought that didn't last long. Bendigo seemed to know the tunnels well, going past several doors before stopping in front of one. If memory served me correctly, this one would take us through a laboratory and to the edge of what he knew of the complex. He had given me maps, but they were limited. Even to me, he seemed to hesitate a fraction too long. I lifted the mask away from my face. What is it? I whispered, and he frowned. It's a shame you can't hack into the surveillance system. It would be nice to know what to expect behind this door. I haven't cracked the system yet. It was true. I hadn't been able to crack the security system guarding the network functioning throughout these tunnels. Oh, wait a minute. The system's still functioning, I said as I made it through the security wall. I just need a port. Bendigo lifted the cover away from the keypad beside the door. Jack in here, he said, indicating the port I already knew was hidden in the interface. The system, I began again, only to have him cut me off. Your point? Who's monitoring it?